Good morning, and thank you for tuning in to Nadya's Identity Files. I'm excited to be with you today for another identity-filled hour. It's the last week of January. Today is January 31st. I can hardly believe it. And it's also the end of the first week of a brand new and somewhat, scratch that, very unsettling presidency. For many, this has not been only a difficult and tiring week, but a very disappointing week for Americans and for the global community who cherish diversity, the environment, and freedom of speech. There is a positive, however, that's come out of all of this. People are becoming more socially and politically active. What we're seeing, though scary, is the catalyst for change and the launch pad, hopefully, for many to turn to activism. And speaking of, today, in today's segment, activism and advocacy is a key part of my guest's identity. Miriam Hanine is an investigative journalist, producer, entrepreneur, and documentary filmmaker. Her documentary, Vanishing of the Bees, gained critical acclaim with its candid look at the depleting bee population. She's the founder of Honey Colony, a health collective that operates very much like a beehive, and we'll get into that when she comes on with me. Miriam understands the necessity of looking to nature for solutions of both the macro and the micro scales. Make no mistake, the plight of animals, big and small, is a definite harbinger for humanity and what is to come for us. It is up to us as a global hive to listen to what nature and Mother Earth is telling us. So Miriam and I will look at the bees as a metaphor for her and others' identities, and also discuss the evolution of her identity as an activist environmentalist, and look at the bees and the depleting bee population as a metaphor for the status quo that we are dealing with in today's society. But first, obviously, always, it's time for today's identity news. I'm going to try my very best to keep it brief, but it's a little hard to do that in light of everything that's been taking place in the past week. Given everything that's occurred, it's really hard to kind of encapsulate all of this in less than 10 minutes. In just 1 week, our friend Trump signed a slew of executive orders aimed at, I'd say less so than making America great again, but more at undermining the work of his predecessors and proving his power and identity in what he believes to be an action-oriented manner. He feels that he is the answer for all of America's problems, and less than aligning himself with a Republican agenda, he's aligning himself with his own agenda and doing things his way or the highway. For instance, signaling that refugees and oppressive environmental regulations and the Affordable Care Act are bad, while new factories and American-made steel pipelines and big border walls are good, is a pretty clear indicator of how he wants America to feel not only about him, but the direction of the country under his rule. So, take a look at the Trump image on the screen right now. This is a really cool image that I found when I was Googling Trump. Obviously, there are a million quadrillion images coming up right now about Donald Trump. And to be honest, I'm kind of tired about hearing about him, and I'm sorry for having so much of my identity news revolving around Donald Trump, but it is what it is. This is what we're dealing with right now, so I feel it's something that does need to be discussed, and particularly in the context of identity, because these issues are very relevant to our identities. So if you take a look at that image, there are a lot of question marks about, and little questions like, who am I, and different insinuations that kind of give the idea that Trump's basing his identity on some very specific components. And, think about this. Trump at one point was a Democrat. I believe that he was a Republican, then he changed to the Democratic Party, then he changed back to the Republican Party. He's kind of moving with the ebb and flow of what he thinks will help him rise to power. That is my opinion, but it's also the opinion of many other people. He really doesn't seem to care what people think, but at the same time, he really does. Because, take all of these endless tweets that go on and on and on. it's unbelievable. I really can't with it right now. The adversaries, he has so many adversaries. He bases his identity off these adversaries. That's kind of highlighted in that image as well. So, who is he now? Who is he now? Obviously the approval rating for Donald Trump is dipping low. He was in big time denial of that. And for someone who claims to cherish American values and who claims, at least during his race for the presidency, to base his identity off the importance of American values and making America great again, the attack on freedom of speech and on diversity and the environment and so on is really not sending the best signal that he's trying to make America great again, but more so that he's trying to make America about Trump again and trying to make America a reflection of his worst self. He's projecting his worst self onto America, and it looks as though he's trying to take America down with him. So, I mean, I hate to go there, but at the same time, these issues are so relevant, and I mean, it's also fascinating. There was a great article that came out in the February issue of Vanity Fair that details the behind the scenes of the entire Trump family, from Ivanka to Tiffany to the brothers or his sons and Trump himself. I really suggest that you check that out. It's really, really interesting stuff. So thinking about the recent executive order wherein, he's made a move to ban more than 218 million people from the United States, denying entry to all refugees from Syria. It's just really unsettling stuff. A lot of it seems to be aligned with his desire for, maintaining that image and less of a concern with the status quo and protecting us, given the fact that countries like Saudi Arabia were not included in that ban, and Saudi Arabia housed a good number of the terrorists reportedly responsible for 9/11. We all know that Saudi Arabia also houses several Trump business endeavors. So, I'll leave you to think about what all of this means. And on Sunday, obviously, again, I mentioned earlier that the positive to come out of all of this craziness is people are really starting to embrace what it means to be an active citizen. On Sunday, thousands of people converged at LAX to protest the immigration ban. They came together, they marched, and they screamed, "Love, not hate, makes America great." I love that. I wanted to go to these protests, and I will admit, I was scared. It's scary. So I really commend the people that went out there. We all have different ways of exercising our activism. It means something different to all of us. So I really want to give a pat on the back virtually by way of the radio waves for going out and, making your voice heard. So, again, it's wonderful to see people coming together to support diversity and to condemn the xenophobic and greed-inspired actions we've recently seen. But it really is unfortunate that we have been led to this, and I'm hopeful that good will prevail, but we can't just assume that. We have to continue being action-oriented and educating ourselves. One last thing about Trump before I move into my interview portion of today's episode. He also has it out, and it's for the EPA, for the environment. And this issue relates very heavily to what we're going to be discussing on today's segment with regard to the future of the environment. At the beginning of the week, Trump asked that the EPA freeze all grants and funding. There are plans to cut thousands of jobs potentially. As far as I'm aware, that freeze has been temporarily lifted, but also very scary. There was an EPA gag order. Trump requested that EPA hold off on, tweeting about recent work, etc. And in addition to that, there was a request that the EPA remove an important climate page from the website. So I'm not really sure what type of country and world we're about to move into, but I am frightened, but I am confident that as we come together and cooperate, much like a hive, much like honey colony, and much like the work of the bees that Miriam Heinane has very much worked into and exploring, I'm hopeful that good will prevail. So we might not be facing an apocalyptic Orwellian future, but the chance is there. So when we come back, I will be discussing the plight of the bees, identity, activism, and environmentalism with Miriam Heinane. Very excited. Stay tuned.